Every morning the sun rises. Every time you drop a ball, it falls. But how do you know these things will happen tomorrow? Is our trust in experience truly justified? Or is it just a habit? In today's episode of the History of Philosophy, we're going to meet one of the greatest philosophers of all time. And the question is, why did he say, "Don't trust your experience"? Welcome to the Socratic Sense, where we try to answer the great questions of philosophy so that you can sound smart when people bring them up. Today we're talking about David Hume and the problem of induction. In order to understand Hume's argument, we first need to get a little bit of background on his life and his project. So let's begin with a brief overview of who was David Hume. David Hume was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland. He was one of the leading figures of the Scottish Enlightenment, along with figures like John Smith and Adam Ferguson. But unlike his friends who pursued theology or political economy, Hume was drawn to philosophy and history. He is best known for his philosophical works, including a treatise of human nature and an inquiry concerning human understanding, as well as his massive collection of essays, both philosophical and historical. But we'll focus primarily on his empiricism and the problem of induction. Hume was a radical empiricist. That means that he held that all knowledge comes from experience and sensation. For Hume, the mind is a blank slate, or as the philosophers say, a tabula rasa at birth, meaning that all the content of our mind comes from experience. There's nothing in there before we start having experiences. To understand how Hume's empiricism worked, we need to distinguish between two types of ideas according to him: impressions and ideas. Impressions are the original, immediate and vivid sensations and feelings that we have. These are like seeing the color red for the first time or feeling pain when you touch a hot stove. Ideas are fainter, copies of impressions that are formed in our thoughts and reasoning. These are things like remembering that red color or thinking about pain. According to Hume, we don't have any ideas that aren't a copy of an impression. Therefore, everything we know comes from our sensory experiences. But how could Hume say that we have ideas of things that we've never experienced? For example, how do we know what it's like to taste chocolate if we've never tasted it before? Well, Hume argued that we know what it's like to taste chocolate because we imagine it. And imagination is really just a kind of memory. We remember the experience of tasting it and we sort of reconstruct it in our heads. So basically, all complex ideas can be broken down into simple ideas which are ultimately derived from impressions. And if an idea doesn't have a corresponding impression, it's meaningless. And that's empiricism in a nutshell. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's dive into the problem of induction. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that Hume was radically empirical. He didn't think we had any innate ideas, or that we could use purely rational deductions about the world. For him, knowledge comes from experience and experience alone. So here's the problem. Let's say you have a friend named Mark. Every time you see Mark, he's wearing a blue shirt. You also notice that every time you see a dog at the park, it's a Labrador. Now you conclude that Mark will be wearing a blue shirt next time you see him and that every dog at the park is a Labrador. The first statement, Mark will be wearing a blue shirt next time you see him, is an example of induction because you're drawing a general conclusion from specific observations. This is what induction is: the process of drawing general conclusions from specific observations. The same goes for the dogs at the park. But how do you justify induction? Hume asked. We observe that the sun rose today, but how do we know that it will rise tomorrow? Well, we know that it rose today, yesterday, and the day before yesterday. So it seems reasonable to expect that it will rise again tomorrow. But how do you justify that expectation? Hume points out that we never actually see causation. We only observe constant conjunction. We see the sun rise and the rooster crow at the same time, but we don't actually see the mechanism by which the sun is rising. We just see that those two events occur together. This is important because the question is, how do we know that this constant conjunction will continue in the future? How do we know that the sun will rise tomorrow? Hume argued that we can't justify induction logically. Here's why. The statement, "the sun will rise tomorrow," isn't a logical necessity. It's not like all bachelors are unmarried. It's perfectly conceivable that the sun could stop rising. We could imagine a world in which the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. Therefore, we can't prove the statement logically. But what about empirically? Could we prove it by appealing to our senses? Unfortunately, we can't do that either, because in order to use induction to justify itself, we would need to assume that the future will be like the past. And that's exactly what we're trying to prove. We're trying to prove that the future will be like the past. So we can't justify induction empirically because that would be circular. It would be using induction to prove induction. Since we can't justify induction either empirically or logically, we have no justification for expecting that the sun will rise tomorrow. We have no justification for expecting anything. And this is Hume's problem of induction. We have no justification for believing that the future will be like the past. We have no logical basis for saying that the sun will rise tomorrow, that water will flow downhill, that matches will produce fire, that billiard balls will move in predictable ways, or that your breakfast won't suddenly start flying around the kitchen. So how do we know any of this stuff? According to Hume, we know it because we've experienced it before. We believe that the sun will rise tomorrow because it always has, but there's no guarantee that it will. We believe that water flows downhill because we've observed it doing that in the past, but there's no logical basis for this belief. We just have a habit of believing that things will be like they've been in the past. And this leads to a pretty weird conclusion. According to Hume, we have no justified reasons for our beliefs about the future or our beliefs about causes. We just have habits of believing, and this seems to leave us in a skeptical position. How do we know anything? How do we know that our breakfast isn't just going to start flying around the kitchen? Well, this is why Hume is called a skeptic, but he wasn't a skeptic in the popular sense of the word. When people call someone a skeptic, they usually mean that they doubt everything. But Hume wasn't like that at all. He still believed that we could know things. He just said that we couldn't justify that knowledge. For example, Hume argued that we have justified beliefs about the past. We can look at evidence and we can say, yes, this is evidence that it rained yesterday. We can look at evidence and say, yes, this is evidence that Mark was wearing a blue shirt. The thing we can't justify is our beliefs about the future and about causes. So Hume's problem of induction leaves us in a pretty weird place. We can know that it rained yesterday, but we can't justify our belief that it will rain tomorrow. We can know that Mark wore a blue shirt yesterday, but we can't justify our belief that he'll wear a blue shirt again tomorrow. We can know that water flows downhill, but we can't justify that knowledge. We can't even justify our belief that it's Tuesday. How can this be? What's going on here? How can we know what we know? This question bothered philosophers for years and eventually led Immanuel Kant to find a new way to ground knowledge. But that's going to have to be another episode. So what should we take away from all this? What's the takeaway? Well, the problem of induction shows us just how difficult it is to justify our beliefs about the world. It shows us that even our most fundamental beliefs about cause and effect and the future are ultimately based not on logic or pure experience, but on habit, on custom. So when we say that water flows downhill, what exactly do we mean? We mean that we've observed water flowing downhill in the past and we expect it to continue doing that in the future. And when we say that matches produce fire, what exactly do we mean? We mean that we've observed matches producing fire in the past and we expect it to continue doing that in the future. We are creatures of habit, according to Hume. So how should you respond to Hume's challenge? Do you think he was right that we can't justify our beliefs about the world? Or do you think we can find some other way to justify them? Maybe you think that we don't actually need justification. Maybe it's enough that we just believe it. Or maybe you think that Hume overlooked something really important. Whatever you think, share your thoughts on Hume's radical skepticism in the comments. And if this challenge to certainty intrigued you, like this video and subscribe to The Socratic Sense for more profound insights into the limits of human understanding. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing. Also, be sure to check out our other videos, which are just a Socratic Sense away.